I'll say this for him, he's consistent.
Well, he's been so consistent all year.
Not the taste, consistency.
Consistently, yes.
Consistency! Thanks, losers.
Hey, what's happening, big guys and ladies out there? This is Bob Lung from Big Guy Fantasy Sports, and welcome to the Fantasy Football Consistency Show. Once again, we just want to say thank you for being here, and want to say welcome to my illustrious co-host here, Ron Rigney. Ron, how's it going?
I'm good, man. We're just gonna, the thing is, we're gonna talking about this consistency thing, and I like the focus of tonight. We're gonna kind of start at the ground level here, and just kind of give you an idea of what it is that is going on with this consistency over at Big Guy Fantasy Sports. I'm still pretty super jacked as well from last week from the Colts' huge move of Eric Ebron, which was breaking news as we were on the air. I don't know if you remember that.
Yes,
but also the signing of Ryan Grant at wide receiver.
The guy that failed the the medical
That's the one.
at
the one.
the Ravens right when Crabtree became available. Yeah,
and see, the thing I was kind of hoping for is I was hoping maybe it would be, instead of him, maybe the running back that was successful for the Packers a few years ago, because he didn't have the failed physical, but it definitely was
right.
not.
The same Ryan Grant. I got you.
Yeah.
Right.
So we'll see what we're gonna do with all this money that we're sitting on, but that free agent market's drying up real quick, so I don't know. We'll see.
I think it's already dried up weeks ago.
Yeah.
It dried up before it started.
I'm hoping there's some miracle salary cap casualty that is not yet on the radar, because we've got a lot of spots to fill and we got a lot of money to spend, and there's not much.
And then you traded back, so now you get the sixth pick instead of the third pick. So, but you got a lot of extra picks. You're like the Browns. You're just becoming the new Browns.
Honestly, with the way the Browns roster looks right now, I'd like to be the new Browns.
Yeah, I mean, exactly that. So, like you said, this week we're going to kind of get into just kind of talk about the humble beginnings, what consistency is about. This program is really going to be kind of the best thing to listen to if you're new to consistency. Not necessarily new to fantasy football, but new to consistency, because it's been around for a while. I've been doing this since 2002, but it still really hasn't caught on. Yeah, my book sold. The book sold pretty well last year, and things are moving, and there's a lot of street cred out there with a lot of the other national experts, and that's all great. But, my whole goal in doing this was to share this with the 60 million fantasy football players, owners out there. So, so that's kind of what we're all about this week. And, hopefully just can kind of put this all together in one nice little hour package and let people listen, kind of understand. And then if you have questions, you can always hit me up on Twitter at Bob_Lung, or you can email me at Bob at bigguyfantasysports.com. I'll answer any questions anytime about consistency and how it can help your team. So, Ron, I'll send it back to you.
Kind of a cult following, almost, if you will, for the consistency. So
yeah, the tens of people. No.
So
one of the things scary, because that means I'm feeding them Kool-Aid, and we don't want to get to that level.
That's true. We definitely don't want to get creepy on people. So
no.
So anyway, one of the things that I always noticed, when I listen to the XM shows and when I listen to all the podcasts, and you listen to all the pretty much same stuff I do, is you hear the word consistency a lot, and you hear it especially when you listen to a football show. So I guess from our standpoint, from what and I've been lucky enough to kind of join the team within the last year. But you're kind of the architect of this whole thing. So just, based upon, what we got on the side and what it is, we're starting kind of at the ground level here. Let's just kind of get a definition for what really is this consistency thing that we talk about here each week.
Exactly. So, realistically, what this is all about is, when you're playing in a head-to-head format, and this can be in baseball, basketball, whatever fantasy sport you play, if you're playing head-to-head, and you're relying on a specific group of players every week as your starting lineup, you want, obviously the whole goal is that you want to score more fantasy points than the opponent. And that's great, and you certainly want to do that. But what can kill you is if you draft guys who, when you're looking at that end of year numbers and you see players that are ranked very high in their total fantasy points, you think, well, that's got to be a great player to have. I should go after that player. But what can happen is that people draft inconsistent players, but who are also high scoring. So, for example, if you draft a running back and he scores, 30 points in week 1, and then comes back and scores 5 or 6, and then goes back and scores 24, and then scores, 7, and goes up and down like that, at the end of the year, that running back is going to be averaging, let's say, 12, 13 points a week. And that's fantastic. That's a pretty good year. I mean, if you multiply that out times 16 games. But the problem is that if that player has been inconsistent like that in his scoring, he's going to hurt your team. Because the week he scores 30, you're probably going to win, but you might win by 20 points. Okay, you still get a win, but you don't get any more brownie points other than one win. The next week, when you score 5, that guy scores 5 or 6, you might lose, and you might only lose by 2 or 3 points, but you still lost. And then and it just keeps going on all year. So after your 14 weeks of your regular season, you're 7-7, but you have the highest scoring team or top 5 scoring team out of 12, and you're sitting there just scratching your head going, what the heck just happened? And that's where the inconsistency comes into play, that people, when they're frustrated and they don't understand why they're not winning, when they're scoring a lot of points, I would say more often than not, it's because they have inconsistent players on their team. So that's kind of what it was all built around. That's what it kind of started, and kind of came into play of the identification of why having consistent players. Because if you have a running back who scores you 12 to 13 points a week every week, more often than not, you're going to win a 1 or 2 extra games there, and that's going to help you go, instead of 7-7, it's going to make you go 9-5, and you're going to make the playoffs. And the only way we can win a championship in most leagues is if you make the playoffs. So, that's what I always said. The whole goal is that. People are like, well, how many championships do you win? I go, I don't track championships. I have an idea. I've won a number, certainly. But my goal every year in the number of leagues that I play is to make the playoffs in every league. Now I've had years that I've made, 75% of the leagues I was in made the playoffs. I've had years that I've been, 60, 50, 50. I'm usually above 50%. Last year was actually a kind of a poor year. It was 13 out of 23, so a little bit above 50%. But that's always my goal. Then I have the chance to win the championship. And I won, I think, 4 championships last year. But again, you can't win a championship if you don't make the playoffs. The consistency gets you to the playoffs. Then you have that chance and that opportunity, to win, at least have a chance to win. So,
and I think that's happened to everybody that plays this. You sit at the end, and I've had leagues where I've led wire to wire, and you make the playoffs and you lose first week by a pretty huge margin. But I've also had leagues where it's kind of like what you spoke to is I'm having at the end of the year, I'm looking at my average points per game and I'm looking at it and I like it, but at the same time I'm barely 500 and it doesn't make a lot of sense. And so one of the things we'll speak to a little bit later too, I think, is one of the things I like about this in a draft is if you look at just the numbers through consistency standpoint and you cover up names. I've done that with the charts that we have. I like to kind of look through and just kind of pick out a set of numbers, and I think people get too attached to name value. Right. And I think that's one of the things that using this benefits you to do is if you can separate yourself. Now I know we all have our teams and the guys we like and the guys we root for, and that's fine. But if you can kind of separate yourself from that, this really lends itself well to being a nice draft plan. And so we'll get to that here in a little bit. Now, when you came up with this idea, did this stem from a season where you ended up not doing as well as you wanted to and you just kind of started digging in to find out what you could do differently? Or is this something that you just kind of had an epiphany one day and said, hey, I think I can put this formula together? Like, how did you come up with the formula to figure the consistency?
Yeah, so most inventions come from some kind of failure. And so I've been playing fantasy football since 1985. And yes, kids, that's before the internet. But and for years, I won my championships and didn't win my championships, and had some years where I didn't make the playoffs and scored pretty well, and it was kind of all over the place. Again, I was pretty successful just playing what I was playing, and it was a very basic league because the internet didn't exist. We did just touchdown only, so it was very low scoring, so it wasn't difficult. But anyway, the epiphany, as you call it, came from my failure in 2002. So in that season, I had Sean Alexander on my team. Sean Alexander won the league MVP that year with 15 touchdowns rushing. And in our scoring method, you got 6 points for rushing touchdowns, but only 3 points for receiving touchdowns because the quarterback got the other 3. So obviously, rushing touchdown running backs were huge in our league. So if you had the best guy, you really were going to have, if you could just build something around that, you usually had the best team. So anyway, I did not make the playoffs. I went 7-7. And I was just furious because I was like, I was third in total points. I had Sean Alexander, who rushed for 15 touchdowns. How in the world could I have not made the playoffs with this team? And so I went back and looked, and I noticed that Sean Alexander that year scored 5 touchdowns on a Monday night game. So that was a third of the 15. He scored in 2 other games 2 touchdowns each. So that was 9 out of the 15. And then I think he had another game where he might have had like another 2 or 3 or something. But anyway, long story short, out of the 14 regular season games, he only scored a touchdown in like 5 of them. And therefore, that's why I pretty much went 500. And I'm like, damn. And I did go back and figure it out. I'm like, if he would have scored 1 touchdown or 2 to get to the 15, every week through those 14 weeks, basically, I would have won 2 more games. I would have went 9-5, and I'd have made the playoffs. And I would have won the championship because my team did really well, even though they weren't in. And that just infuriated me. And so, due to the fact that my day job is a CPA, I'm an accountant. I'm like, I got to crunch some numbers. I wonder if I can. So I went out and I found some weekly data and kind of calculated some stuff. And I'm like, so I created my own calculations, they're not actually algorithms, but we'll call them that for fun. My own calculation of basically determining how and what level a player would need to get fantasy points wise each week to be in that, I'll call it, starting lineup of players. So top 12 quarterbacks, top 24 running backs, top 36 wide receivers, and top 12 tight ends. That factor, that what I call the clutch factor or consistency factor, is what the players had to get over each week to earn that clutch game. The more clutch games, the more consistency, better it was going to be for your team. And that's how it all came about. And, that's pretty much how it was all put together.
Now, on a side note, I know you mentioned this to me before, a couple questions about that league that you mentioned. Do you remember who your first ever pick was in that 1985 league, that draft?
My first ever pick, I don't know. I think we might have it documented somewhere. I know that Dan Marino was a very high pick,
okay.
But nobody envisioned that year he was going to have. Because remember, he shattered the passing touchdown record.
Oh yeah. And now you still play in this league too, right? Isn't this league still going?
So
I think that's really awesome too.
Yeah, so the league still goes on. We still play touchdown only. We will not change. We will stay old school. I think that we have 7 or 8 of the original 12 members are still in the league. They're all very good friends of mine from high school. And, it's just one of those things that, we always used to meet for a live draft. That's kind of went away because guys have moved to Michigan and Columbus and all over the place. So but we still do it. We still do it. We also, one of the few, and one of the first ones I remember, we've always done an auction draft. We basically didn't. Well, I take that back. I think our first few years we didn't do an auction, but we did start an auction pretty early in the 90s. And on top of that, we made it a keeper league with salaries and salary caps and all that kind of stuff. So, we've always said we were kind of ahead of our time when it comes to auctions and salary caps and stuff. But we've always, it stays the same, and same guys play, and it's been almost 33 years now. Yeah, 33 years now. So yeah, it's we're not as old as the original from 1969 in Oakland, but we still pretty much rank up there with a lot of the oldest leagues in the country. I got to believe.
Well, that's cool that you've kept it kind of the grassroots of it the same, but you've evolved it a little bit. Which, by the way, that league is almost older than I am. So
yes,
just want
really.
to throw that out there.
Yeah.
So I guess the one thing I get asked is when I ask, people ask me who I write for, what sites I'm associated with, they immediately, when I say Big Guy Fantasy Sports, they can immediately say the word consistency in most cases. And so the thing about it is, like, the book did really well last year, and it continues to do well, and it's one of the best out there, and I'm not being biased at all. But essentially, what is it that sets apart what we do and what you do over at, especially at Big Guy Fantasy Sports, that kind of puts ours towards the top and lends itself to be that one that people need to go to Amazon and get, or go to our site and get?
Right. Well, like you said, thank you again on the book. So last year was our huge year. I mean, 2 years ago, I put it out for sale on Amazon. I might have sold 100 copies. This past year, I sold over 850, which was great, and I was just amazed by that. The one website, Cheat Sheet War Room, chose the book as their favorite, their what they called their best fantasy football magazine of 2017. Which I was just honored by that. But I think even the biggest honor was when the book was nominated by the Fantasy Sports Writers of America as a finalist for Best Fantasy Football Hard Copy Printed Publication of the Year. I didn't win, but just to be in the same realm with Bob Harris and Chris Harris was just an amazing feeling to me.
I hear those guys are pretty good at what they do.
Yeah, they're not bad. So for those who don't know, Bob Harris is the man, the legend, and a fantasy sports writer, Hall of Famer from Football Diehards. Chris Harris, longtime ESPN and huge podcaster, has a huge following on Twitter. Both are amazing guys and super people. And like I said, it was just an honor to be that. But the one thing that when I really started to do this and wanted to make this a tool that people can use on the internet or on the web was to be different. And that's always been my concept here, was to be different with the consistency concept and the way it calculates. And the one thing that the Clutch Report does, which you can find on Big Guy Fantasy Sports under Tools, there's a Clutch Report intro. It's a little article that kind of explains how it works and how to use it. And then at the bottom you can just click on the link there and it'll take you to the report. But is that it is basically customizable. So you can put in your own scoring method to see how consistent the players were in your league. And that's one thing that is exclusive to basically all of fantasy sports. There is nothing out there that will help you look at consistency with your own scoring method. There are certainly lots of sites out there that talk about consistency, will show consistency for one, like a PPR format or a standard format, but you can't change it. If you are 6 points for passing touchdown and non-PPR and you get points for over 300 yards, bonus points for over 300 yards, you can put that in there and it'll recalculate and show you your consistency for those players under that format. That is what makes us different. That's what makes us unique. The book just does, of course, PPR formats, because if not, the book would be like 800 pages. So we do just PPR, but you can go there and then put in your own scoring method, see all that information. This book is the only fantasy football magazine that is 100% all about consistency. All 175 plus player profiles, shows 3-year history of their consistency, shows their consistency in various game scenarios, whether it's home, away, against a top 10 defense, bottom 10 defense. Also their clutch games earned per game during the year. So you can see guys who kind of had a great second half or a great first half. That helps in showing trends, and we talk about that. So we just use all that data to give our followers, our readers, and our listeners something that you just can't find anywhere else, and that's what makes us unique.
And I think one of my favorite things with the book is when you do the 3-year consistency chart there, because I tend to side with those guys. Yeah, it's kind of like in baseball too. You try to figure out what a guy is, and it's unfortunate when you have these younger guys when you can't really you don't have enough data to kind of pull from to see what what you think they consistently might be. And like in this scenario, if you have a guy that is only in the league a year or two, you don't have much to compare it to. But I like that. I think that 3-year sample size is just enough that it gives you a nice idea of, you can kind of figure out who that guy is that you're going to draft. And I tend to kind of side with those guys that show that 3-year, the more consistent, the better. So that's one of my favorite parts of it.
And then I think the other thing that I use quite a bit is that clutch games per week, because many, many times I have picked for breakout seasons in the next year of guys who had nice, consistent second halves, but kind of flew under the radar. I remember the year before Jimmy Graham and Antonio Gates both broke out. They quietly had like 6 out of 7 clutch games over the last 7 games of the year. So when you looked at their numbers, you're like, okay, they were like 20th in total points, and they were like 7 of 16. So, it looked kind of boring on the, but when you look at their second half, that most of their clutch games came in the second half of the year, something jumped out and said, hey, this guy was clicking with Drew Brees. I think he's going to be a undervalued tight end. And he was, and Antonio Gates was the same way. And I've, with that information, have identified some really good breakout players, ongoing, in the past. And I'll do that again this year. Like, one of the guys I like a lot is Alex Collins from Baltimore. Had a nice second half where he had 6 out of 8 clutch games. And when you look at his numbers overall, it looks kind of boring, because you're kind of looking at him going, 18th in total points, 6 out of 15 in clutch games. Okay, not bad, not great. But 6 out of those 8 was in the second half of the year. So, you annualize that over a season, and he's up there in the top 15 guys at running back. Good value there, and certainly be a guy that I'll be, promoting as an undervalued, consistent player.
Definitely, and I think it puts in context to, not every guy is going to be an RB1 or a wide receiver 1, and I think a lot of people kind of get wrapped up in trying to get wide receiver 1 numbers out of every guy every week. But if you can just put together just a solid roster from top to bottom that's going to score you points and get clutch games every week, that's going to do more for you than having those top level guys. Or, you see those trades where, you get offered like 3 guys for, your top guy at a position, and that's all well and good. But, you can only have so many of those top guys. And, even with some of those guys that we think are top guys don't always perform as top guys, as this kind of shows us. So, sorry. I get the book. I have it in my hands. I go to my draft. I kill my draft. I'm consistent across the board. What do I do then? Like, what do we have on the site, or some things that, once I get after maybe week 1 or week 2, I have some injuries out there, or, I've got bye weeks coming up, or I get offered a trade, and, I want to know if a guy is going to contribute to that consistent game plan that I have. What are some things I can do on the site each week to kind of keep my consistency game sharp?
That's a great question. And so during the year, every week, I write basically what's called the clutch, or the consistency week in review, and kind of look at the past week and see which guys were earned a clutch game. But more importantly, and where it comes into play, is you can use that clutch report that I just talked about, where you put in your scoring method. Well, we update those stats every week after the games, after the Monday night game. And so you can go in there and start watching the trends of the guys who might be becoming consistent, but people aren't recognizing them. Because what happens is, more often than not, is that every week there's somebody who jumps into the top 5 scoring for the week that nobody's ever heard of. We call them the 1 week wonders. And so everybody jumps on that guy. Oh my gosh, we got to jump on this guy because he had 22 points as a backup running back, and he's gonna be a god, and I'd say probably 1 out of 10 may become a consistent player for the year. More often than not, they just kind of fall back and be just the regular guy they were before. What people don't see is the trends of the guys who like 3 weeks in a row maybe score, like I said, 12, 14 points at running back. So they don't jump up into that 20-point or more range, so nobody really notices them. But they quietly just put up 3 straight clutch games. That'll get recognized in the system under the clutch report. Then you can look at your waiver wire and go, well, he's not available, but I notice he's sitting on, Colby's bench. So we should trade for him because Colby probably doesn't think much of him. He's already got 2 good running backs, and you can steal that guy away from him and help your team without giving up much because you know they're consistent and they have that trend going, and that can help you with that, like you said, with the trades, waiver wires, and just keeping on top of that stuff all through the season, and that's what you get on the website during the season that will help you each week, and you can always email questions or see the information that's there.
And one of the things too that shout out to our guy Colby Conway as well. The weekly reports lend very well to your cash games in DFS also. This is a formula that and as we go along, we'll talk a little bit more about that. But the formula, I think, lends itself very well to your cash games because it's kind of the same scenario. You're not trying to knock it out of the park and take down a huge tournament with some guy that you've never heard of. But at the same time, when you get in those 50-50s or those double ups, you're just trying to finish in that top half. And I think this, that high floor kind of consistency concept lends itself very well to that. So those are very helpful in that regard as well. And like I said, we'll elaborate on that as we go. So one of the things that I am going to use this for is when we look at data from last season and going into this season, because you mentioned it before, those years that you have where you go in and you think you have you always think you won a draft no matter what. It's very rare that I come out of a draft not thinking that my draft is just the greatest, but the season plays out very differently with injuries and just inconsistent play is what we're trying to combat here. What are some things that you can take if you had a season like mine that was a dumpster fire from beginning to end, and you get to the end? What are some things that you can use this concept to try to figure out after the season is over, so maybe we can improve going into 2018, maybe difference in a draft strategy or something like that? How can we use this to improve on what we failed upon in the previous season?
Right. So on the website, on the Big Guy Fantasy Sports homepage, if you scroll down near the bottom, there's a number of articles that I've written for basically folks who are new to the consistency world, and they can read them and kind of understand the terms and stuff. But one of the ones that I've always liked and I've always told people to try is the article that's called Improving Your Record with Consistency. And it's the one that has Andrew Luck there, obviously holding his arm up, so he must not have been injured yet.
It must be at least 3-year-old picture.
At least 3 years old. But what you'll see there is I actually tell people to take your team's actual record, and there's an example there, and it shows the league, and it shows the league average of total points. And then you go there and you take the actual record, calculate everybody's fantasy points, average points per week. And then what you do is take each of their average fantasy points per week and then compare their game by game against the other team in the week they played them. So, if a guy's, for example, in this one, this guy's 9-5, but he averaged 129.3 fantasy points a week, which was second highest in the league, but he was 9-5 and he didn't make the playoffs. So if you went and said if he scored 129.3 every week, his consistency, his record should have been 11-3, but he was 9-5. And the reason why is that he'd scored 150 in a week and then score 110 and score 145 and score 105. So his inconsistency, if you compare it that way. Now, as you'll see, all the guys who were under the league average didn't do any better, if not worse, because bad consistency is still bad consistency. It's not going to help you. If you're consistently bad or you're inconsistently bad, you're still bad. So, people are like, well, if I'm more consistent, and, that's one of the things that some of the sites out there look at the consistency of the player on a week-to-week basis. Not that they consistently were good, they were just consistently scoring. Well, if you score 5 points every week, you're very consistent. In fact, you're 100% consistent because you scored 5 every week. But you suck, and it doesn't matter. So I'd never understand some of these sites and some of these guys out there that are promoting their calculating consistency because they're using standard deviation of their own number, of their own average of the player. And I'm like, well, all you're showing is if they're consistent from week to week, not necessarily whether they're consistently good or consistently bad. So that doesn't always share the same right information. But if you do this and you go and you compare your records, you'll see whether or not your team could have been better if they were more consistent. If it shows they could have been, then you need this site, and you need us to help you find those more consistent players next year, and more importantly, stay away from the inconsistent players that may have hurt your team last year.
If only we could take you mentioned Sean Alexander before. If only we could take maybe and build up a surplus of touchdowns and extrapolate those over 16 weeks, and use them when we need them. Kind of have that,
exactly.
That build up. We can't.
Yeah, you
unfortunately
need to allow to have roll forward.
There you go.
Right?
Yeah,
wasn't that a thing with cell phones where if you didn't use all your minutes, you could roll them forward? Wouldn't that be awesome if
minutes.
you could do that in your fantasy football league?
There you
go. I outscored the other guy by 30, so I got 29. I'm rolling forward the next week.
Yeah, and I think you and I had a week where in our CBS league we were playing against some guys from some other sites, and I think you and I had one of the highest scoring weeks one week, and then I think you and I dropped like 70 points.
Didn't we score like 210, and then next week we scored 105? It
was absolutely we doubled it. That you're right. It was absolutely nuts what we were able to do, and it was like, oh, that's great for a week, and then we just get our ass kicked the following week. So that kind of speaks to it right there. But it's it is kind of a crazy concept to think about. You can look at that total points and you can see that you are in like the top 3 or 4 in scoring, but you look and you don't make the playoffs. You know what I mean? And so I think that's one of the things that we're trying to kind of combat here is, I think it's cool to have a great record at the end of the season, but it's not cool if you get in and you lose in the first round of the playoffs, and it's because of that, because you have guys that don't show up. So one of the things I wanted to kind of do is kind of highlight, both sides of the coin here, because we talked about guys that are consistent, but we also talked about guys that were inconsistent, and we're kind of comparing as well. When you look at our rundowns here, our year-to-date end of the year charts here, and if you've listened to the previous podcast, we talk a lot about how the total points and the clutch rating don't always necessarily go hand in hand. Prime example of how they do would be DeAndre Hopkins. DeAndre Hopkins was lights out in both categories last year. He was by far the most consistent wide receiver, and he had the most total points as well. But when you go down the list here, we're looking, and another thing I like about this too is it only highlights the games that the player plays in and how consistent they are in those. So that you got to look at that too and kind of understand it. It could be a little bit misleading, but it shows when they're on the field, either they're putting up points that you need to score every week, or they're not doing anything, and there were those 5-point a week consistency guys that you mentioned a little bit before. Right. So what I wanted to kind of do is kind of look at a couple guys here. So the first guy I'm gonna throw out there, and we can kind of speak to how this works, is Cam Newton. And when we broke down quarterbacks, we look at Cam Newton. He's third in total points, but he's only 44% consistency. So I don't know if you want to kind of speak to just kind of how that comes together. It looks great on paper on one side, but the other side, he's our way down at the bottom, almost a number 30 as far as our consistency rankings.
Yeah, and I mean, this is a perfect example of what I mentioned just earlier about identifying those guys who are inconsistent and are hurting your team. It's even worse when they mask that inconsistency with a good total points ranking. And Cam Newton is about a perfect example as we can get. I mean, third in total points, almost 350 points, just barely 3 points behind Tom Brady. But yet, his inconsistency, the fact that this past year, the clutch factor, clutch rating, or consistency rating, or the number that he had to get over on a weekly basis was about 18.7 fantasy points a week. So that's saying that only 7 times was he over 18.7 fantasy points in a week. Now, what this also means is the fact that he had that many points means when he went over, he went way over. And I know he had some weeks where he had 30, 40 points. So he blew it out of the water some weeks, but then would come back with a 5 or 10 point week, which killed fantasy owners who had Cam Newton. And people will argue, they'll see that third total points, and they'll be all over Cam Newton this coming draft year because of like, oh, look at that, and he still got McCaffrey and Devin Funchess and blah blah blah, and Greg Olsen, but he sucks. He's just not. He's just inconsistent. There's no way I'm owning Cam Newton, regardless of where I'm going to draft him. So, and he definitely should be one of those guys that you should, you listeners out there should also be looking at the same way.
Now, as we're looking at that negative side, Cam Newton's a great example of that. Alex Smith's another guy too that was high in total points, but 16th. He's not as far down the list, but still, that kind of shows you that the big points kind of came in bunches. Who's the guy that you want to throw out as far as to maybe kind of show us the other side of the coin, as far as a guy that has that the opposite of that Cam Newton effect?
Right. Well, one of the guys, and I'm really kind of digging him heading into this year, and I've never been a fan until this year, is Jameis Winston at quarterback. Winston was 18th in total points because he missed 3 games. So his total points wasn't that great. So people were kind of going to look at that and go, he's Jameis Winston. He's going to be that guy. He's not that good. But the difference is the past couple years, Jameis Winston has been 12th, 15th in total points, maybe even higher some years. But this past year, his consistency skyrocketed from like 50% in the past couple years to almost 70%, 69%. So he was actually 6th in quarterbacks consistency-wise. If he can stay healthy, and with the team that they have, they're kind of building around him with Mike Evans and Deshaun Jackson, and they've got the duet at tight end with Cameron Brate, OJ Howard. If they can get a good running back in there to help kind of take some of the pressure off Winston, I think he's a good value because, again, people are going to look at that 18th ranked total points, but we see the consistency side, and it was much better for him. He's definitely improving, so this could be a good value of a guy that you could draft as a backup. He might end up being your QB1 during the year. It might help you from week to week.
Well, and I won't ever say that in fantasy, especially, the quarterbacks ever kind of go under the radar because it's the position where there's very few good ones to go around.
Right.
And every time there's an injury or somebody has a big game, everybody hops on them in waivers. But Jameis Winston's another one of those guys. I think he was at the end of the season about as under the radar as you can get. I know you spoke to that earlier about this kind of lends itself to maybe digging some guys out for that next season that kind of quietly ended strong. And I just kind of pulled up Jameis Winston's game log here from last year. And if you look at him from week 13 on, he's yardage-wise 270, 285, 299. And then at the very end of the season, 367 and 363. Now, you probably weren't playing him in week 17 unless you have a league that goes all the way to the end. But week 16 could have been your championship week, and that could have been the guy that won it for you.
Wow. So, so there was only one quarterback who went a perfect 5 for 5 over the last 5 weeks of the season. That was Jameis Winston. So Matthew Stafford didn't. Russell Wilson certainly didn't because he was only 3 for 5. Tom Brady was 1 for 5. In fact, the only guys who went 4 for 5 was Roethlisberger and Blake Bortles. So there, it just shows you that Winston was clicking at the end of last year, and now could be a good value going into 2018, especially since I'm guarantee his ADP is going to be in double digits.
Yeah, and like you said, just with the weapons they have around him, they let Doug Martin go. Right. But if they can get somebody out of the backfield consistently, it's kind of scary what they might be able to do. There's weapons all around, and I love to see too. And we kind of joked around a little bit about Cleveland, but at the end of the day, I love to see when they give a quarterback something to work with. I think it's asking a lot of these guys when they get put in these situations where they don't have weapons. Okay, go out and make everybody great, and some guys are able to do that. Some guys are able to kind of lift guys up and take them to that next level. But it always helps too when you have a couple solid check down options at tight end, or you have a guy where Mike Evans is a guy that we kind of talk about with that under the radar. We might mention him later on at wide receiver, but Jameis Winston can just chuck one down the field and just have him go get it. There's not a lot of guys that can do that.
Deshaun Jackson as well, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, a couple of guys that can do that. So we'll kind of look at the running back spot here, and a guy that I wanted to highlight and see what your thoughts were and just kind of speak to his consistency level was our number 19 guy on the board, Chris Thompson, who finished 27th in total points, which doesn't look that great, but he had a 60% clutch rating when he was in there. Now, he did miss some time with injury, but out of the 10 games he did play, he was clutch in 6 of those. So what do you think about Chris Thompson?
I think he's going to be, again, one of those undervalued guys in PPR. People forget about the fact that, like you said, he was red hot coming up through the season there. In fact, I was just looking here numbers-wise, but he started off. It says 6 of 10, but he was actually 6 out of 7. And then I think things, he started kind of falling apart, and But he was 6 of 7 after the 7th game in a PPR format. Look now what has happened. Now it's Alex Smith, so we don't have Kirk Cousins. They've lost Terrell Pryor. So that's kind of a messy offense right now. So my thought is that Chris Thompson, if healthy, should be relied on quite a bit in this offense, coming out of the backfield as well. So, I kind of envision him kind of picking up where he left off. If he's healthy, again, could be some great value as a PPR, like a running back 3 PPR-wise, but he could be starting as your flex every week.
Right, and he's another guy too. When we look at what we're talking about here with consistency too, outside of all that, he's a guy that scares me just the way he's built. He's just not built for that pounding every week. But then again, he was a guy that last year we had these guys that we kind of wait for him to fail. Like when is it going to turn midnight and the carriage is going to turn back into a pumpkin again? Right. And that didn't happen with him for, like you said, till about like week 8, week 9. You started to kind of see the wheels fall off. So it's a case of you just keep going with it, and it keeps working. Another guy that I wanted to throw out and just kind of see what the thoughts were was Jerick McKinnon. And Jerick McKinnon's a guy that he was a top 20 total points running back. After Dalvin Cook goes down, he's the guy that kind of steps in and takes over the reins there. But only a 38% consistency rating. Now, to be fair, a few of those. Because I can't remember what week Dalvin Cook got hurt. It was early on.
Week
I know.
4.
Week 4. Okay, yeah. So Jerick McKinnon played 16 games, but he may not have gotten a lot of meaningful touches if Dalvin Cook was in there. So, what about that 38% clutch rating he has with that 17th rank in total points?
Well, like you said, I think obviously he got more opportunities after week 4. Prior to that, he didn't earn any clutch games in the first 4 games. So basically he earned 6 out of the last 12. So that's 50%, which it puts him right up there in the RB2, RB3 type of realm. When you look at the 50%, it's Jordan Howard, Deion Lewis, Joe Mixon, Jay Ajayi. So if you just based it on the games, he was literally kind of more of a starter with Latavius Murray. He certainly was pretty beneficial. Now the key is that he's going to San Francisco, where he's kind of becoming the main guy with Matt Breida. I just don't know if he's built, like you said, just kind of like the other scenario you were talking about. I don't know if he's built for that kind of pounding like a Chris Thompson, but I think he's going to get it, and I'm not sure he can make it through a season. He won't be a guy that I'm going to be excited about. I know a lot of people are. They think that in that Kyle Shanahan offense, he's going to be awesome. I think he will be for the first 5 weeks or 6 weeks. I just don't know if he can take that all year. I don't know if I'm going to take too much of a chance on the hype, especially if his ADP is up there. Good talent. I just don't know if he can keep up with the amount of touches he's going to get.
Yeah, I think he becomes. I think we talked about him a little bit too on the running back awards, and you kind of like you highlighted, Bob, the fact that they are paying him that kind of money to be that guy. So it kind of speaks to the fact that he's probably going to get the lion's share there. Moving on to wideout, a guy that I am very intrigued to see what happens with him as far as where he ends up, and based upon what he put up, last year. A guy that I definitely was not on last year, and rightfully so, was Dez Bryant. And when you look at what Dez Bryant did, he's another guy, a case of 23rd in total points, which doesn't look too bad. You're kind of in your wide receiver 2 range there, high end wide receiver 3. But at the end of the day, he was only 50% as far as clutch, and it's one of those things that you look at his numbers and they're not really all that great overall, but to be the 23rd, in total points, you would think the consistency might be a little bit higher than it is.
You would think, because there's certainly other players, as you go higher up the list, Juju Smith-Schuster was 21st in total points, but he was at least 64% consistent. Stephon Diggs was 19th. He was 64% consistent. So, there's no reason, but, Dez seems to be just a shell of his former self. I don't know how far he's going to drop ADP-wise this year. But I really don't see me even touching that. This will be one of them. I think you mentioned earlier when you talked about drafting by name, this will be where Dez Bryant will be drafted, will be by name, because his numbers aren't there. He just doesn't seem to be mentally and physically able. I don't know how, if they're going to try to draft some wide receivers and let Dez go to save the money. I don't know. Obviously, he is a well-known figure down there, and Jerry Jones, probably may put up with him for another year, but it just doesn't seem to be all that into it, and I'm just not a fan of him going into this year.
Alan Hearn's on the scene now as well, and I'm kind of intrigued to see how that works out as well.
That actually might be a good value there.
I agree. I think that's an excellent value, and I don't know if you as long as you can kind of take in context what you're getting out of him, he's definitely not going to be your wide receiver one, right. But I think it could definitely be some good value there.
Yeah. You got to remember,
who's a guy
2 years ago, not to interrupt, but 2 years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, when Hearns and Robinson had that fantastic year together, Hearns was in the top 20 in consistency that year. So he certainly has the ability. He's just always had a problem staying healthy, and he had Blake Bortles. So, with Dak there and, Dez on the other side, I got to believe Hearns could be a good undervalued player. So.
And it's hard to have a 1,000-yard season and kind of go under the radar like he did. But when you look at Allen Robinson, that was the year that he had 1,400 yards, I think, at 14 touchdowns. So definitely pretty big there. Who's a guy maybe around, I don't know, let's say in the maybe 30 to 40 range that maybe wasn't necessarily, or let's even go a little further than that. Let's go maybe to that 40 to 50 range. Let's go around our 50% guys and below. Is there anybody in that range that kind of strikes you for maybe moving on to a different scenario? Maybe somebody left town and they might get bumped up a little bit. Is there anybody in there either for a positive or negative, a guy that you might peg that could maybe move up our consistency ranks or maybe fall down a little bit based upon whatever factors might be presenting themselves?
I have to, there's a lot of guys in that range. We've got, Marquise Goodwin, Kelvin Benjamin, Paul Richardson. Paul Richardson going to Washington, right?
Yeah.
Yes. Him going to Washington certainly might be a guy that could move up consistency-wise because he'll certainly see more touches there. Again, it's going to basically be him, Josh Doxson, and I just went brain dead. Jamison Crowder. So, I think there's, that possibility there. Some other guys in that realm, Marquise Lee with Robinson and Hearns gone. I could see him moving up consistency-wise. In fact, with the way they played at the end of the year last year, seemed like Bortles was clicking with him and D.D. Westbrook. So I think there's some, potential there as well. But, I think there's always guys that you kind of look at and go, can they pick it up? Again, I kind of look at that clutch games by week that you'll find in the profiles in the book to kind of see if there's somebody that may have had a great second half that can kind of pick it up. And Marquise Goodwin's probably the one that kind of jumps out the most because he had 8 clutch games for the year, but 6 out of 7 over the last 7 weeks. So if I'm going to pick somebody, and with Jimmy Garoppolo there, he'd be the guy probably I could see moving up and being probably in that 65 range or maybe higher, depending on how it goes there. But he'd be the guy I pick.
Yeah, I love me some Jimmy Grapes going into next year, definitely. Last but not least, let's talk about our tight ends. Can't forget our tight ends, the catcher of fantasy football, and see what we got there. When we look at this list too, tight end is such a crapshoot when you get past maybe like about the top 5 or 6 guys, and it's just more of a function of you're looking for guys that have high. At least me, I'm looking for guys that have high touchdown upside and get maybe a touchdown or those 2 for 10 and a touchdown or 3 for 38 and a touchdown. So who's a guy maybe that we might think, I don't know, maybe in that we'll go 10 to 15 this time. We don't want to go too far out of left field here. But is there a guy in that 10 to 15 range that you're looking at that might take a little bit of a leap up our rankings for next year?
Well, first off, I want to give some love to the tight ends because honestly, there were 9 tight ends that were 67% or higher consistent. That is way above what the past has been. More often than not, if there is even 5 that are over 67%, that's amazing. So for 9 this year, I'm actually quite surprised by the consistency of tight ends. Now, everybody, again, will look at total points, and here's the key. If you look at total points, you see first, second, and third, Kelsey of 235, Gronk with 225, and Ertz with 200. And Ertz and Gronk both missed 2 games. Kelsey missed 1. So everybody's going to look and go, well, there's only 3 tight ends worth drafting because those guys were all over 200 points. Yes, they are very good, and that certainly is a big deal if you can get one of them. But what round are you going to have to draft these guys in? The mock drafts and the ADPs I'm seeing is if you don't get one of these 3 before the end of the 3rd round, they're gone. So do you want to take that chance to draft one of those guys and miss out on your RB2 or your wide receiver 2 or maybe even a top quarterback like Aaron Rodgers when you could pick Evan Ingram, Jack Doyle, Delaney Walker, Kyle Rudolph, or Jimmy Graham, who are all over 67% consistency. And, points-wise, yes, they're below the big 3. But you can get those guys in the 6th, 7th, 8th rounds and still get the consistency that's close enough to help you on a weekly basis without having to, give up that 3rd round pick to get one of the big 3. So this tight end scenario this year I think is very important. But going back to your question, because I didn't forget that, I think there are some guys out there that can have some, good, positive, movement. Actually, one guy, I'm actually going to go a little bit farther down, and that's George Kittle.
Yes.
Our Kittle and Bits boy, the last 3 weeks of the year, had a perfect 3 for 3 in clutch games with Garoppolo, basically, kind of in sync with him. And I really think that this guy in a PPR format could be a nice value for going into this year. Jack Doyle, again, is a guy that, had 10, he's 10 of 15, so he was 67%. So, that was impressive. I know that they signed, that stiff name Ebron, but that doesn't matter in my opinion.
No, it makes no difference.
But Jimmy Graham going to Green Bay, I don't think he's going to improve. I think his consistency will stay about the same because Graham is kind of a touchdown-only guy. He might get 2 or 3 catches, but he gets the touchdown, so he gets his 10, 12 points here in the clutch game. That's great. But, as you can see, his total points was 169, so he was 7th in total points. Well, Delaney Walker was 5th. So, but I guarantee you Graham is going to get picked before Delaney Walker will be because he's in Green Bay, and everybody thinks he's going to be, the second coming of Gronk, and he's not. Ben Watson was probably the most amazing guy. Nobody even drafted Ben Watson. He ended up 11th in total points, 11 out of 16, 69% consistency. He's still the tight end in Baltimore, and they really haven't improved that much. They got Crabtree, but they lost Wallace. So, I think if he stays healthy, which he did last year, he could be a nice, tight end to draft. Again, late, probably in the 10th or round or higher. And he put up some nice numbers last year, and nobody probably even realizes it. The other guy was probably Hunter Henry would be the other guy.
Yeah, definitely. Another thing I think it's worth noted, too, is George Kittle with he kind of came on at the end of the year or in those few games, and he was top 20 in total points as well as far as, being consistent towards the end of the year. Another guy that I want to throw out there, too, is in that same range that we talked a lot about in our tight end preview or tight end awards as well was Trey Burton. Mm-hmm. And it's one of those really under the radar signings that you look at it and you may not really associate because he's a guy that I didn't associate the name with actually who he was until I thought about it for a second. I'm like, oh yeah, that was the guy that filled in for Ertz and was actually pretty damn good when he did it. So I think
all 5 of his clutch games were when Ertz was missing, or at least 3 of them, right? Yeah,
and he was definitely an option in the red zone as well for them also.
Right. So no, I definitely agree. But like you said, this whole consistency thing and in highlighting some of these guys for folks that are listening is just, these are the kind of things that we can help you with and that the book is going to come out and share with you that information. The other great thing about the book and when my goal is June 1st for it to be done, is that, it's a working document. So, if you buy it on Amazon or you get it through the website, I'm always updating for injuries or player movement and that kind of stuff all the way through the season. And so, that is always updated so that, if you bought the book in June because you just want to, read it on your Kindle when you're sitting at the beach, that's awesome. But, as you get closer to the draft, you want to know if there's any changes or any updates. Well, you can come to the site. You just email us and let us know that you got the book on Amazon. Show me your receipt, and that's all cool. And then, I'll give you the updated book and the updated tier draft list, which will help you in your draft. And we didn't even talk about that, but we'll do that another time. It's certainly something that I'm proud of, and these guys help out and do a great job, and all through the site, and Ron does a great job with Colby of putting out the consistently cashing, and I know a lot of us did cash out on some cash games with using that consistency concept. So it's a great thing to help everybody, and it's just what I love to do.
No doubt. So I guess to kind of, at the end here, we're going to get pressed for time. We'll throw out, just some things that we're working on here. And, you kind of mentioned, the consistency stuff there, and June 1st is the target date, right? And, when those drafts get going, the thing about over at Big Guy as well is we'll add a little bit of baseball stuff over there too,
Right.
With the baseball season coming up, we're kind of at that point Thursday, and so you can catch me over there. We'll be contributing the football stuff, but before that, you'll see the prospect on deck circle every week for me. I'm going to be highlighting a guy that you might be able to grab off of waivers. It might be a little bit of a help for you as far as somebody that might give you a little boost as the season goes on. Could be a pitcher, could be a hitter, could be a guy that might be that next guy up. With what we have going on, I think Colby Conway is going to contribute some closer stuff over there as well. So
Yep.
So not just from a football aspect, which is kind of the money maker, I guess you could say, but we'll have a little baseball stuff over there as well.
Right. Well, and like you mentioned, Colby doing the closer report every week. You'll be doing the prospects, which is fantastic. I picked up quite a few of those guys during the year and helped me win the WBLZ league, and I know you won the Couch Tomato one too. But the other thing too is so our good friend Matthew Sells, who is also a writer for our site, him and I are actually working on. He's a kind of a pro at an expert at the whole Excel game, and so he's actually trying to get some baseball data, and we're going to see if we can maybe create consistency reports for head-to-head baseball leagues. So keep an eye out for that. We might get that out, just test it out a little bit this year. It may not be a web-based, maybe more of a Excel thing, but we're going to kind of do some testing on that, and hopefully we'll get that out as well. So again, thanks everybody for listening. If you have any questions about consistency, if this is your first rodeo with it, welcome aboard. We'd love to help you out. Answer any questions. If you want to even send the data of your league last year, and we can kind of talk about it and look at your team, and maybe even look at the players you had, and maybe identify those inconsistent players that might have hurt you. That's what we're here to help you with. So we just want to do that, and just help you guys kind of have that new edge. Everybody that always emails me after the season are like, man, I had never heard about this, or I kind of heard about this, but I really never realized how important it was. And man, my team with last year was sucked, and this year made the playoffs, or I won my championship. And that's the greatest feeling. I know it is for Ron, and it is for me, that you just hear somebody go, man, thanks so much for helping us out, because you guys are different. You guys are bringing something to the table that nobody else really has at this level. So we're just proud and happy to be a part of that. So as we close here, just say, you guys can follow Ron Rigney at the Real Made, which have you ever explained to me what that means?
I don't know if I have or not. It's the Real Made. I don't know. Long story short, I'll give you the long version off air, but basically, okay. Made is a childhood nickname that has stuck with me probably since about age 6, and it's kind of stuck for about 30 years. So. Okay.
Fair enough. I mean, we won't even get into it. So you can follow Ron at the Real Made. Of course, you can find him at Big Guy Fantasy Sports. You can find, of course, me at Big Guy Fantasy Sports, and you can follow me at Bob_Lung. Once again, thanks, Ron, for help co-hosting tonight, and I think we did a great job of just kind of helping explain this so we can help people out. So once again, for Ron Rigney, I'm Bob Lung, and we just thank you for being here, and we will talk to you guys again next week. Take care.